Hey y'all, welcome back to another tutorial, and today I'm going to be showing you how to sew this drape in place. And in case you missed it on Instagram, here's a quick video on how we got to this point of the design. I'm about to show you exactly how I drape this beautiful wool dress. Now let's get into it. So one thing I love to tell designers is that you need to experiment with different fabrics. And so for this tutorial, we are using brushed virgin wool. So for our base, we are going to be using a corset and a mini skirt that will be sewn together at the hip seam. And to finish off our base, we're going to cut some bias strips of the wool, and we're going to top stitch that onto our outer layer of our corset. Now once your base is done, you want to take some ultra stiff pelon and you want to pin it to your base, and we're going to start to add some shape and some definition to our base using this pelon. To get this look, you're going to need at least 2 panels of pelon on one side and 1 panel on the other side. You also want to make sure that the pelon doesn't extend past the hip line, so if it does, you want to cut that off. After that, you want to use your fabric to drape over and in between the pelon panels. When tucking the fabric in between the panels, you want to try and get the fabric as deep into those creases as possible, and then you also want to make sure you do the same thing to the other side as well. But you should have something like this, and then we can go ahead and cut off any extra or excess fabric that we have attached to the drape. Now once the design, the drape is done, now we could go ahead and sew everything down. So we're going to sew down our pelon, we're going to sew down the wool, we're going to sew down our bra cups, and then you are going to get something like this. Alright, so now let's go ahead and get into the tutorial, and I'm going to be showing you in more detail how to actually sew this drape down in place. So the first thing you want to do is you want to get some chalk, and you want to remove that top layer of your wool, of your fabric, and you are going to mark where the pelon falls, because we are going to need to remove this pelon off the mannequin. So you want to make sure you know exactly where it needs to be placed once we need to put it back on the mannequin. Not only do you want to mark that top edge, but you also want to mark the corners as well. And once you finish marking it, then you can go ahead and remove it. And also you want to label the front and the back by using the letter B for the back and the letter F for the front. Once that's done, we're going to sew a strip of boning along the outer edge of our pelon piece. The boning that I'm using for this tutorial is a 1/2 inch thick. Now, you want to make sure that you double check that you are sewing this boning on the outer edge of the pelon piece, meaning the farthest away from the hip. And then you want to sew this you want to sew this boning strip about 1/2 inch away from the edge of our pelon piece. You also want to pay attention to the curve of the boning as well. So basically how our pelon piece curved along the hip, right? We want our boning to match that same curve. Otherwise, it's not going to really lay the best. If you sew it the opposite way, it's not going to lay the best when we try and put it back on the mannequin. And you can also leave about a 1/2 inch of space at the top and bottom ends of our pelon piece as well. Once the boning is attached, you want to go ahead and pin that pelon piece back to the dress, and you want to make sure it's lined up perfectly with the chalk outline that we marked earlier. Also, this is important to note, but when you remove the fabric from over the pelon, you want to make it easy to put it back in place where it initially was. So one of the things I did was I put pins in the fold of that piece of fabric that laid on top of this pelon. But you want to just make it easy to put things right back where it was. Otherwise, you're going to have to either re-drape some things, but you want to make it easy to put everything back in place. Now, once you have done that, you can go ahead and thread your needle, and you can start hand sewing that inside edge of our pelon piece to our dress or to our garment. This part is going to be the easiest part to sew. Once we get to that second layer, it is going to be a little bit tougher to do just because the positioning of it. But like I said, hand sewing this part is really easy. I'm really just grabbing a few of the threads from the actual wool, from the fabric, and then I'm grabbing the very end of the edge of our pelon, and I am just sewing that together that way. And my stitches are about maybe a 1/4 inch, maybe a little less than that, far apart. Now once you're done sewing that entire edge to the garment, then you want to place the fabric back on top, and we're going to repeat these same exact steps to all of our other pieces of pelon. So we're doing that to the second layer that was on the other side, and we're doing it to this third piece of pelon on the other hip. Don't mind how crooked my boning looks like it's sewn. I promise you I sewed it in well. But yeah, I'm just going to repeat the exact same steps on the other side. Once all of your pelon pieces are sewn, you want to go ahead and do an invisible stitch and sew that top layer, or those top layers of the fabric, on top of your pelon. I'm sewing it, I want to say maybe a 1/4 inch possibly from the pelon, but essentially exactly where I had the fabric laying beforehand when I originally draped the design. I'm just sewing it in that exact same area, and I'm trying to keep these stitches as invisible as possible. Next, once you sew those top layers of the drape, now we have to get in between those creases. So when you do that, you want to try and push your fabric into those creases as deep as you can go. And when you are sewing down or hand sewing the fabric to the garment, essentially we're going to be hand sewing in a few places. So for some parts you want to hand sew the fabric to the underneath side of the pelon, and for some other places you want to essentially hand sew in between both panels, but you're not sewing on the pelon, you're actually sewing the fabric to the dress itself, making sure that you don't, of course, grab pieces of the mannequin. But essentially those are the main two areas that we're going to focus on hand sewing, or the main two types of ways we're going to focus on hand sewing for this side. And the deeper you make the crease, the more crisp it's going to make this drape look. And last thing I'll mention, I had my hand sewing stop for this top fold. I had that stop a little bit above the hip area. So next we need to clean up our side seam, or clean up the drape in general. Since I have this drape only covering the front half of the dress, I need this to finish off in a way that's really clean. And so we are going to open up our skirt and have the bottom half of this drape be sewn into the side seam of our mini skirt. And before you fully take things apart, you want to make sure that the drape is pinned in place exactly where it's supposed to be. That way you don't end up shifting any parts of the drape. Now, before hand sewing this part down, you want to make sure that the drape is something that you are happy with. So it took me a little bit of playing around with it to get it to how I wanted it to look. I don't like my drapes to look super uniform, meaning it looks like the exact same technique or the exact same motion or flow the whole entire way through. So I was trying to, get some more curve, some more shape into it. But once you get it to a place that you're happy with, then you want to go ahead and sew, basically hand sew like a basting stitch, and attach that drape to the skirt. When hand sewing this stitch, you want to do it close to the edge of the skirt pattern or fabric. So since a portion of the top part of this drape crosses over to the bodice side of the garment, I'm going to need to create a little bit of separation. So as you can see, I cut a little slit, and I'm going to mark where that actual seam falls at, like our waist seam, and we're gonna just cut a little bit of separation. I still want it to look seamless, but we're gonna have the top half of this drape, or the top portion of it, go into that corset bodice seam. As you can see, I'm removing our top stitching that we did for those bias strips, and we're going to have this little piece of fabric go into that, and then the bottom half of it will go into the skirt side seam. And of course, any extra bulk that may be there, we're going to just remove it out of the way. So I'm marking where that seam will fall and just removing any excess fabric. Now, if your entire drape is able to go into the side seam of the skirt, then you wouldn't have to worry about this part. But after I finish removing that bulk, then I'm going to go ahead and just pin it in place and make sure that bias strip, that bias piece covers up the fabric perfectly. So once everything is sewn down or sewn in place, we should have something that looks a little bit like this. Like this is the goal. This is what we're going for. Something that's neat and clean. So now, if you like, you can remove that extra fabric that was hanging over the edge of the bottom part of that drape. And then you can go ahead and start hand sewing everything down in place. The bottom of the drape is already sewn down, but you can now sew down the top portion that basically crosses over to the corset side of things. So now we can go ahead and base stitch the side seam of our skirt. We could base stitch that closed. So now once that's done, you should have something like this. We are still going to sew this by machine, but this is what you should have. And we'll also need to still do a little bit more hand sewing over that opening, over that seam, just to give it a little bit more of a cleaner look. Now, once we've sewn in between all the pelon folds, we'll also need to go ahead and sew in between our draped layers, our pleats, if that's what you would like to call them. Because those also need to stay in place as well. It's super important that when you're creating drape designs that the drape actually holds. So that means we need to get all up in between these layers. Now, the key thing to remember when doing this is you want to make sure that the places that you are pinning are like anchor spots. I like to say anywhere that there is a pin, that's where I would like to hand sew. That's how I know I need to do some hand sewing there, some hand tacking. You don't want to just place random stitches throughout the drape. You also don't want to sew all the way through it, because that also affects how the drape moves. And so we want to make sure that we are only hand tacking, hand sewing in the necessary spots. So now we need the back of our skirt, the back of our dress to look really good as well. So I'm going to open up this seam and put our drape inside of that seam, tuck it in, and then do a little hand sewing there as well to make it look neater. Once that is open, then we want to go ahead and just tuck in that piece of our drape. We want to make sure that there are no like frayed ends or raw edges that are showing. And then once that is pinned together, then you could go ahead and just sew that seam back closed on the sewing machine. Now once that's done, we're going to do even more hand sewing. This time we're going to be hand sewing inside the creases or the folds of the other side of the drape. And once you finish doing hand tacks there, we also want to do a little bit of hand sewing at the front as well. So as you can see, I have this dip in my drape, and I want to make sure that part holds its shape as well, because I think that part is actually super instrumental to the look of this style. And so I'm going to stitch across the fold or the crease or the dip. I'm going to stitch, I want to say I ended up doing like a stitch that was about 1 inch wide across that fold. That way it could just help my dip hold its shape really well. Now once all of your hand sewing is done, then we can go ahead and take our lining, which has our boning on it, and we can prepare to attach our lining to our drape. To do that, all I'm going to do is take our skirt first and attach our skirt to our corset lining. And when we do this, we're just going to do the same exact seam allowance that we did for our outside of our drape, for the base of our drape, or the base of our garment. And before we attach the actual lining to the corset, we want to go ahead and hand sew our bra cups to the inside, or I guess this will be the outside of the lining, basically on the same side that we have our boning. This will go in between the layer of our outside of our garment and the lining. And then finally, we can just finish everything off by sewing our lining to the outside fabric of our garment and just making this all one piece. This part I'm not really gonna go into detail on explanation just because I think this is something that most designers probably already know how to do, but just to give a few tips that may be helpful, always make sure when you sew your lining to your outside of your garment, try and top stitch the lining or understitch the lining. That way you can make the edge of your garment more crisp. And then also something else that's really helpful is to make sure you cut and clip your corners. I decided to cut the back half of my garment off or remove it just because I no longer wanted to do straps, so I had the back of my garment going up really high. But once you have everything sewn, essentially you are going to have this finished product. But yes, y'all, I'm super happy with how this turned out. Thank you to Mood Fabrics for sponsoring this video and providing the fabric. If you'd like to learn how to drape like this in more detail, then see the description for information on my courses and classes, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye, y'all.